It's Binjang 91.5. You're listening to Tony Graham. I'm in Studio 2 and I'm talking to Matthew Dickerson with Tech Talk. Good afternoon, Matthew.
Good afternoon, Tony. Great to be chatting to you again.
Yes, look, it's interesting what's going on with the mobile phone market. What amazes me actually is a simple thing like a mobile phone. You'd think there would be not much room for any changes over the years, but mobile phones just keep on developing year by year by year, and the changes have been dramatic ever since they've been put onto the marketplace. So now, who is the current leader in the Chinese smartphone market? And I guess the other question is, should we really care?
Well, I think we should care a little bit because China is such a big market, and if a company sells a lot of phones in China, then maybe they're onto something, maybe they've got a good product, and maybe that will leak out to the rest of the world. Of course, Huawei were typically the number one seller in China, and they have been for some time, but Huawei is going through a few little issues around the rest of the world, and maybe that negative publicity has started to actually impact on their sales in China. In the past, people weren't too concerned, I suppose, about what was happening in the rest of the world. They were just continuing to buy their phones. But for the first time ever, Oppo, or anyone in terms of the last few years, but Oppo for the first time ever has knocked Huawei off the top of the tree. And it's only for 1 month, only for the month of January, but they did quite well. They captured 21% of that smartphone market throughout January. That was ahead of Huawei and another company called Vivo, which we don't really know of in the rest of the world. They both were about 20%. Apple and Xiaomi both rounded out the top five below those three, sorry. So it's quite interesting the change there. Oppo's sales were up 26% year on year and increased 33% from the previous month. Really what drove that was their latest Reno 5 series, and basically they brought out a new phone with new specs at a lower price. Surprise, surprise, that was a good seller, and that's what helped them gain some of that extra market share. The interesting conversation going forward in China will be, where does Huawei go from here? Is Huawei on a downward spiral that will be very hard to arrest, or will Huawei hit back with some better phones and maybe some positive PR? I think it's worth keeping an eye on it in the Chinese market, and we might see that around the rest of the world as well.
Now, Matthew, Oppo is a Chinese maker as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think people in China are very parochial in terms of what they would buy. So even the fact that Apple's up there with a 16% market share is a little bit surprising that they're actually so high in the Chinese market, because obviously Apple's not a Chinese brand. But yeah, I think in China people are very focused on buying their own products first, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's very true. Matthew, what is the latest plan to take the skies for the Royal Australian Air Force?
Yeah, look, at the end of February, there was an aircraft that took off, a fighter plane, and you think, well, that's no big deal. There's lots of RAAF planes flying every day, doing test missions and pilots training. But in this particular one, the pilot that was training wasn't on board the aircraft. This was the first manned drone of a fighter aircraft that the RAAF has actually had flying. So sitting there over at the Woomera Range Complex in South Australia was a pilot on the ground, but up in the air was flying a 38-foot long aircraft called the Loyal Wingman. Now, the idea of the Loyal Wingman is that it's designed to go into battle with real fighter planes, with real pilots on board, but it's really, as the name suggests, a wingman there to help, protect, assist normal fighter aircraft. So, for example, going into a dangerous area, you might send the Loyal Wingman out in front and see whether it can survive going ahead, maybe do some reconnaissance, but basically be there to help protect the real aircraft or the real fighter aircraft. It's probably the first we'll see of lots of drones. Fighter aircraft, look, it would be nice to see them up in the air without people on board those. And again, this is the first step. I think we'll see more and more of this sort of thing happening. More and more drones are flying. It's a different world up there in the sky, Tony.
Well, it certainly is. And my understanding is that this is the second drone, but the first one made in Australia with the assistance of Boeing in the development. So we will see a lot more of these, because the first lot of drones that hit our skies, there weren't that many of them. They were imported from America, as I understand it.
Yeah, well, this one was actually made by Boeing, and you're right, in conjunction with the RAAF. They've been contracted to basically build 6 of these aircraft. And one of the interesting things about this particular aircraft is the nose. It's got actually an elongated nose. The nose can be swapped out or in and out very quickly and easily by technicians on the ground so that it can change what it's doing in a short period of time. So it might be out there taking photos in one mission, the next one it might be using some different technology, and that nose is critical to be able to allow the one aircraft to do a range of different tasks.
Mm. Now, the next question I have for you, Matthew, is a vexed question, I think. It's one that I'm actually crossing my fingers when I'm asking you this question, because as far as I know, this hasn't happened to me, but have you had your email hacked, God forbid?
Well, I haven't, thankfully, but at the moment there is a lot of Australian businesses that have been exposed in a cyber attack. And this is basically focused on Microsoft, people that are using Exchange Server at the back end, and that might be people using cloud versions of it. There might be Exchange at the back end of that, but are using Outlook or Outlook Web Access on the front end. Now, Microsoft reported last week that a state-sponsored Chinese hacking group called Hafnium had exploited security flaws to basically either get into people's email or plant some hacking tools in machines running Exchange. Now, of course, Chinese authorities have denied all knowledge of that, but we'll leave that alone for the moment. Most importantly, Microsoft initially said it was only American businesses that were affected, but there's some information to suggest that there are businesses, organisations around the entire world that have been impacted by this, including businesses in Australia, obviously. So it's one of those things that make sure you patch your computers, make sure if you are running a server with Exchange Server on it, then make sure that's patched as quickly as possible. The Australian Cyber Security Centre has said that they've found evidence of Outlook in Australia being attacked, and really their advice was get those security patches on as quickly as possible. But that doesn't mean you've necessarily solved the problem, because you could apply a patch right now. If you've already been impacted by it, the damage might already have been done. There might be already some things on your computer. So basically look out for some unusual behaviour, I suppose, is the secret for that. And it just goes to show you, it doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter what size organisation, you can be hacked.
And I take it, Matthew, you can be hacked without necessarily opening up an email that contains spyware or anything else like that.
The normal way that people use email to attack you is with what's called phishing, spelled with a PH, where essentially they're sending you something, you look at it and go, gee, I wonder what that is. That tells me I've won $10 million in some lottery that I never entered. I'll open that attachment. Oh, gee, nothing happened. Unbeknownst to you, something happened at the back end of that. So you're right, that's a normal process. This one here actually went for the Exchange server at the back end rather than at the Outlook client at the front end, and then tried to infect your PC in that way. So this one, you didn't have to make some silly mistake or open something you shouldn't have opened. This one, you could be totally unaware that anything's happened and suddenly you've been infected.
So you're saying, in other words, they're getting into your webmail at the back end without you knowing about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's quite disturbing.
Yeah, it is.
Really is. Yeah, and I do know of a few people that have been attacked with ransomware, and that was a very expensive exercise to fix.
Yeah. Critical to have good backups, Tony, so that if you do need to fix it, you can go to a backup.
Yes, that's very, very true. And when we're talking about isolated backups here too, of course.
Correct.
You must have isolated offline backups.
Yep.
And you'll be listening to Tech Talk on Binjang 91.5 with Matthew Dickerson. Stay tuned next week for the same show at the same time on Tuesday. And now it's back to the great music and information.
All right, thanks, Tony. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, Matthew.